Hello there, posthumans. I'm Dr. Carmel Vaisman from Tel Aviv University. I research digital culture, and I want to talk to you about what I call the Zoomization of our lives or life on screen as a result of COVID-19 from a posthuman perspective. Our traditional social theory is humanistic, if only due to the fact it assumes an embodied face-to-face social interaction. Any other type of interaction is within the realm of media theory and considered merely hyperreal or parasocial. When my research field of digital cultural theory emerged with the internet of the 1990s, it kept examining early internet subcultures through the lens of that old social theory, with categories such as identity, community, conversation, and public sphere. Researchers were optimistic at first, arguing that virtual communities restore the Gemeinschaft, the village vibe within the globalized world. They imagined all of us creating distant intimacies, remote social institutions, distant learning and working from home as a utopian ideal of society. In the 21st century, digital media activity has been taking an increasingly growing part of our everyday lives. However, life is still predominantly embodied, physically based, and location dependent for most people. Hybrid, augmented, but with a firm foot in the physical. Ironically, it was the dystopian circumstances of a pandemic that invoked these conditions of the imagined 90s utopia, a life lived entirely on screen. Now, for some people, these circumstances that forced us to go fully virtual or remote are not a temporary setback, but perhaps a glimpse into our post-human future. The human is understood as an embodied being, bound by space and time and dependent on its biology. The trans or post-human can transcend these limits. Homo sapiens becomes Homo cyber or Homo cyborg, which is understood not only in terms of technological augmentations that enhance abilities and extend lives, but also as the boundary between the material and immaterial, biology and information. This is a less discussed boundary mentioned in Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto, but it resonated profoundly with early internet researchers. Our online actions and discourse were seen and explored in continuity with our embodied identity, and new meanings were created from that in-betweenness. So simply making an analogy from social theory to life with and on the internet was not enough. Many things were lost in this translation attempt, and we often engage in moral panic and dystopian conclusions that some things were lost to us. Things like empathy, other-oriented communication, intimacy, conversation skills. I'm sure you all heard such worries associated with or blamed on various media practices. But perhaps they changed form, and we should not look for them through embodied face-to-face related concepts. So part of the meaning of posthuman lives is about mediatization of sociality and hybridity of biology and information technology. But in order to evaluate them properly, we need to understand media affordances as social settings from a more phenomenological or perhaps post-phenomenological perspective. Sandy Stone, an early cyberfeminist, put it nicely in the 1990s when she said, "We still meet face to face, only the meaning of meet and face has changed." So here's one example of what I mean that will help us transition to talking about Zoom and nowadays. Isaac Asimov's novel from 1976, The Naked Sun, occurs on a planet in which people don't meet in the flesh anymore, just screens and holograms. A man from Earth that came to investigate a murder on this planet walks on the victim's wife while she just got out of the shower. But he's merely a hologram, so she doesn't care. You don't see me. You see my image. You're viewing me, she says. And he's intrigued. That makes a difference, but I see you with my own eyes. To which she replies, "You're just viewing me right now. You can't touch me, can you? Or smell me or anything like that. You could if you were seeing me. But right now I'm 200 miles away from you at least, so how can it be the same thing? Now, in our augmented, mediatized lives, we rejected that difference between seeing and viewing in practice. We accepted viewing as equivalent to seeing and learned to rely exclusively on visual perception for things that might require more senses. Like, have you ever thought how absurd it is to infer or presume your sexual attraction on Tinder solely based on viewing two-dimensional images? But perhaps a more notable example was that time when celebrity nude photos were hacked from the cloud and spread online, and Jennifer Lawrence accused any person that viewed her nude photo of sexual harassment. This anonymous gaze was not just viewing, it was seeing, despite the safe distance. So the distance between actions and words, perception and interaction was already significantly blurring in our augmented lives prior to COVID-19. Now, moving to exclusive remoteness and virtuality sharpens such questions and affords the opportunity to adjust our concepts. To me, the question here is, can we live meaningful lives as information in the media? Or do we need to keep our bodies in the loop somehow, and to what extent? Let's take touch, for example. We know we need it, and we feel its absence, especially during these days of social distances. But can we perhaps experience the essence, concept, platonic idea of touch without the actual embodied sense of touch through an analogy of touch, maybe? Let us look a bit at this art project called Pixel Touch from Miri Segal and Jonathan Bar Giora, two Israeli artists. Now, all we have here is the feedback that is generated from my movement that results in a visual overlap with another's image, and we interpret that as proximity. People actually told them they felt the embarrassment or the excitement of intersecting with another person. So this is not just about touching with your imagination. It is a translation of one sense to another. This is what mediation is actually about, according to Bruno Latour. It's a process of translation, but translation is never a perfect reproduction. Latour warns us that this entails a displacement of purpose, and that displacement could mean the world to us. So let's examine now the phenomenology of Zoom versus the traditional fully embodied experience of meeting face-to-face. This interface that I'm also recording in now is designed as a perfect metaphor for face-to-face meetings, suggesting this is a one-to-one translation, and we should act and react the same. But is it really? There are small technical differences that seem insignificant, but they could have radical ramifications on our interaction and its consequences. You all probably read already all the articles that came out recently on Zoom fatigue and how our evolutionary mechanisms are not wired for reading signals from big talking heads. My perspective here is a bit more anthropological. I could talk for hours about these differences, but I will try to weave a quick narrative that addresses three such examples. Small technical stuff that seem the same, but are in fact lost in translation. So one would be seeing yourself while speaking. The second is the technical inability for eye contact. We can't lock eyes. I'm looking at you, I'm not seeing you while I'm looking at the camera, or if I'm trying to look at your face somewhere, then you're going to see me, like Mao Zedong looking at the sky. Technically, we can't lock eyes. And the third is all those mechanisms that we have to control our exposure. Unmute, close the camera, arrange the frame accordingly, etc. So what's wrong with that? Well, philosophers like Emmanuel Levinas, Martin Buber, and Zygmunt Bauman worried about the ethics of connection from a distance. The assumption is that in face-to-face settings, we have little control over our exposure to others. And this is actually a good thing. This is where the magic of encountering otherness and being moved to action by it truly happens, according to them. And we need eye contact for that, since I see you means I see into you through the windows to your soul that are your eyes. And this is the key for intimacy, trust, empathy, which does not happen if our eyes don't lock on one another technically. In that case, I just view you and you just watch me, as if you were just another tab containing a piece of media content. Now, what makes it worse is if I'm busy looking at me while talking to you. Can you imagine presenting in front of a room while holding a mirror to your face at the same time? This unnecessary self-awareness further hinders other-oriented communication. So for social theory, this is a disaster, a loss of the makeup of society. But if we think through media theory, we may notice other expressions of empathy created elsewhere, perhaps through viral sharing or selfie practices that entail witnessing of distant suffering, perhaps where the eyes or the face don't invoke the anticipated ethical response. A good story will touch many hearts. We still are moved to action by a great story. The only news here is that regular people in interpersonal communication need perhaps to adopt media strategies in order to approach others remotely. So it isn't about traditional notions of the face and the eye anymore. So it won't work through the representations of those as well. But we should look for it elsewhere. It doesn't mean it's gone. So these differences between media life and embodied life. Media were invented as a solution to durability across space and time, and they got better and better in overcoming these dimensions. However, space and time are not merely obstacles that waste our resources. They are context for human lives and fundamental to our embodied experience. Experience is in fact a process, a ritual sequence, a procedure. It's not just about information transfer. Even the term information processing assumes a process of internalization. And I'm trained as an anthropologist, actually, and anthropologists see our lives as a series of rites of passage that our bodies need in order to move between categories and situations. Now, did you ever go to a music concert in which the minute you enter the venue, the band jumped on stage and played their greatest hit? That's inconceivable, right? Because when we get somewhere, it doesn't mean we are actually there yet. It takes us some time to settle in, get comfortable, collect our thoughts and our attention, and get some water. And even when we are present, we're not fully open yet to receive. We need to warm up, and this is why they have opening acts. And the energy builds slowly to a climax. We take our cues from other bodies around us and from the organization of experience, architecture, colors, sounds. Our bodies react to it. We adjust our performances accordingly. And finally, we need spaced-on body practices in order to end things too. Separate from things so they won't linger when we move to the next thing. Reflect or share to conclude our experience, come back, come off, climax. This is how embodied humans work. And this is why we need space and time for. So now when all events are remote and all is on Zoom, we simply click and we're there. We can schedule very different events back to back, thinking we saved space-time. But our bodies still need to go through the same processes, regardless. So when your family conversation, college class, and favorite artist performance all happen on the same day, on the same screen, and have quite similar settings, can they even count as experiences? Or maybe they're just pieces of content, information, pixel, more of the same. The nature of information technology is to automate and shorten processes. It offers life in the speed of thought, electricity, and software. It doesn't wait up for our meat hardware. Now, the utopian posthuman would perhaps suggest that we are an adjusting animal, and we could transcend these old evolutionary traits and boundaries and get used to zooming, I mean, it opens up the possibilities of mastery that await us outside our bodies. Accelerated life at the speed of thought that allows us to stretch across space easily in order to be together. No center, no periphery, right? I think this is one of our biggest challenges in this transhuman transitional period. How do we reconcile these different tempos that we have so we can enhance experience rather than hinder it and live in constant FOMO, fear of missing out? So to conclude, doing the same thing but remotely is actually very far from being the same thing on many levels. The displacement, which is an integral part of the process of translation, could be radical. A small change may force us to rethink the whole purpose of the thing at hand. Here's an example. Digital religion scholar Heidi Kempel has published a book recently about the distant church during COVID-19. It includes interviews with pastors that told her they had to rethink what church is. Because for a long time, it was an event with the Sunday service as its central expression. But now, I mean, is this what church really should be about? It presents an opportunity for other expressions to emerge, and they rethink the whole idea of church. So I think we should identify a similar opportunity in this crisis to rethink what the expressions of our lives should be. What is life about? Human, posthuman. Now, as we slowly return to the augmented situation, we might want to allocate our resources and organize our practices between remote, virtual, and physical based on the awareness of the affordances of each facet, and exercise agency and choice to assure that we get the best of both worlds rather than end up in a lose-lose situation. It isn't just about the technology, it's about how we choose to use it. Once you understand how both bio and info media work, you can exercise agency here. For example, don't trust visual perception alone to generate full experience. Don't burden it with the labor of all senses. It's not just about being more tired as a result, it's simply a very poor excuse for living. Now, we use that our behavior is regulated from the outside by the limitations of the space or the policy of the institution, and Zoom is an opportunity for self-discipline through self-customization. It's up to you to decide to open your cameras, engage in the chat, and commit yourself to full attention and full presence. Or just listen to events as if they were a podcast while you're doing dishes and, zap between events like you zap between TV channels. You decide if this is a meeting for you, or perhaps you want to, and perhaps if this is a meeting, you want to help your body get the message through physical space stuff like lighting, attire, candles, music, popcorn. You have to do it by yourself now. Or, you can just let it be just another piece of content that you consume today. I think the implicit silent daily question we all will be facing soon as we come out of the screens is, which parts of life are we fine skimming through, like feeds of unprocessed information? It's really enough. And which should we bother to experience fully in an embodied way and afforded due process? So with that question, I leave you for today. Thank you for listening.